that we have one person in attendance so far, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes, see if anyone else joins. All right, well, I guess we can start. So, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this evening. So just to introduce myself, my name's Eric Simpson. I'm a development planner with the town of Ajax. With me in attendance from the town, we have Regional Councillor Dyes and Ward 3 Councillor Bauer. On the development applicant's end, we have Michael Testaguza from the Bigley Area Group, who is the planning consultant for the development proposal. We have Jillian Jackson, who's the representative of the owner of the development lands, Ivanhoe, Cambridge. And we have Kevin Morris from TMIG, who is the transportation consultant for this development proposal. So following my introduction, we will have a quick presentation from Michael, and this will be followed with an informal Q&A process. For those members of the public joining us this evening, I kindly ask that if you have any questions that you either raise your hand, and you can do this by using the little hand icon that's at the bottom of your screen, and we will enable you access to speak because your mics are currently muted. You will not have camera permission, so you don't have to worry about that. Or at any time, feel free to type a question into the Q&A function, which is also at the bottom of the screen, and we can go through each question one at a time. So please note that this public open house is being recorded for staff record keeping purposes. The purpose of this public open house is to present the development proposal that is before the town, discuss the proposal, and receive comment and feedback on the proposal. So to summarize, Ivanhoe Cambridge has submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application and site plan application to facilitate the development of a one-story, 1.2 million square foot warehouse distribution center. This is on lands municipally known as 537 Kingston Road East, which are located at the intersection of Kingston Road East and Audley Road. The owner also owns the adjacent lands to the west of 537, which will form part of this proposal, but only to some degree, as the majority of these lands do encompass environmentally sensitive lands. So the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the lands to prestige employment zone and to set site-specific development standards to facilitate the proposed development. And the purpose of the site plan application is to examine the design and technical aspects of the proposed development. So Michael has prepared a presentation which provides an overview of the proposal, as well as goes through the current and proposed zoning. So I'll let him touch on that. But before we get to that, just to give everyone a little bit of a background, to date, the town has received one submission of materials for this development proposal, and this includes everything from technical drawings, studies, reports that look at environmental, transportation, servicing, landscaping, architectural design, just to name a few of the matters. And it has been reviewed by staff, external agencies such as the Region of Durham, Regional Works and Regional Planning, the TRCA, which is the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, as well as the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority. Comments on the first submission materials were provided back to the applicant to address. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So Michael, do you maybe want to start your presentation?
Certainly. Let me get it queued up here.
Great.
Okay, so as Eric mentioned, I'll try and keep it somewhat brief but informative. And of course, I think we'll leave more time for the Q&A portion so that we can have more guided answers based on what people are interested in today. So Eric already mentioned the subject site and mentioned the fact that we are talking about zoning bylaw amendment and site plan applications. So the subject site, just to give a little bit more context, is located south of Kingston Road. It goes all the way down to the Highway 401 in the western portion. Along the eastern boundary of the site is the unopened Audley Road allowance. So if you imagine existing Audley Road going all the way down to the 400, that's the eastern boundary of the site. The western boundary of the site is all the way west towards Crothers Creek. So quite a large site, as you can imagine. Primarily at this time vacant. Some portions of it being used previously for agricultural uses. Some portions of it wooded, specifically more so along the boundary of Crothers Creek. So about 32 hectares of the site is developable, and as Eric mentioned, about 43 hectares are actually or in and around there are environmental lands that are going to be protected through the application. So over half of the site, in essence, through these applications is going to be protected for environmental purposes. So this image shows that quite well, and this is the planning policy context. So the image here is the Ajax official plan. Now the subject site is in the bottom right-hand corner of this image, and it's outlined in white dots. Maybe not coming through as clear as I'd want it to, but in any case, there's a lot of colors on here, so bear with me, people. If you can see my mouse here, this is the northeastern corner of the site, walking all the way along Kingston and coming down on the west side of this environmental protection area here. That's all highlighted in green, and you can see Crothers Creek running through the middle, and then coming back across and then up the unopened Audley Road allowance. So this portion that's in blue here is actually the area designated prestige employment in the official plan that is planned for employment growth over the long term. The green portions of the site are the environmental protection areas. Obviously very rough, this is an official plan, but it gives you a good idea of the sense of scale of the site, as well as the proportion of environmental versus industrial employment lands. Prestige employment land, sorry. Now, it's also important here to point out that the Ajax zoning bylaw doesn't match the official plan yet. And that's very typical. Usually the official plan will set out the future planning framework for a site, and the bylaw is typically amended to catch up with that over time. And so right now, the bylaw for the site allows for general employment partially, agricultural partially, and part of it is a deferral zone. So it, in essence, doesn't have zoning permissions right now. So that is in a nutshell, actually, the intention behind the zoning bylaw amendment application is to bring the zoning in line. Right now, it's not in line with the official plan. And so in essence, bring it into prestige industrial and environmental protection zones. So moving on now to the proposed site plan. Eric already mentioned the proposal is for 1.2 million square feet of employment uses. Office, warehousing. There are 4 office pods at the northeast, southeast, northwest, and southwest corners of the building. And they combined are roughly 50,000 square feet of office space. So there's a significant office component to this as well. This is a very zoomed out version of the site plan, and it may be hard for some people to see. So I'm going to go on to the next slide now to get more into the proposal of the site plan itself. It gives you at least a little bit more of a zoomed in view of what's happening, splitting the site in half because it's so large. So let's start off with accesses. So the first access is proposed at the northwest corner of the site. That's to be a right in, right out access only. And then going on further, a second access is proposed at the existing signalized access of Alexander Crossing and Kingston Road. So we'll be adding a 4th southern leg to that intersection. So that'll be full moves, allowing traffic to go in and out, right, left, through. All movements are permitted. The third access to the site is proposed from actually Audley Road, which currently is an unopened road allowance. The intention is to construct the road up until the southern boundary, or sorry, the proposed access location on Audley Road for this time, because obviously at this point there's no reason to build it further south. And so that will be again the final access. Obviously will only permit left outs and right ins because there's nowhere to go southbound. But once you get up to the intersection of Kingston and Audley, it'll be full moves. Okay, now in terms of the locations of the office pods, I think we already talked about those being located at the northwest and northeast portions of the building in relation to Kingston Road. The parking is generally speaking for employees located in proximity to those office pods. So there's pods of parking, we'll call it, beside the pods of office spaces. And again, located northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest corners of the building. So you'll see that again, if you could see my mouse, there's the office pods here, 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 and here. Now, the entire building is surrounded by a ring road. The ring road, and you'll see it right here, coming all the way around the building and wrapping back around here. The purpose of the ring road, obviously, is to facilitate movement of trucks, primarily through the site, and to bring them specifically to the loading areas. Now, the loading areas are located on the eastern and western facades of the building. Now, this was done intentionally. The office pods actually stick out beyond the loading areas, such that they're screened from view from Kingston, as well as from the future Chambers Drive extension, which is on the southern end of this property. So they're facing west towards Crothers Creek, where they're very significantly set back from Crothers Creek itself, I believe over 200 meters and over 300 meters from the closest property to the west. So significantly set back there. And then on the east side, buffered from the future Audley Road by a large natural heritage feature that's occurring on the eastern property line that's regulated by CLOCA, as well as a significant storm pond that's proposed for the majority of the rest of that frontage. So you see the storm pond starting right here and picking up down here in the south, and likewise that natural heritage feature right here, northeast corner of the site, southwest corner of Kingston and Audley. So lastly, just want to give everybody an idea of how the building is going to look. So this is the facade looking right here at the bottom of the screen, as if you were looking at it from Kingston Road. So you see the office pods themselves are articulated here. And then there's some further kind of architectural detail in the middle of the building to provide some, I guess, further visual interest is probably the best way to put it. Now, with regards to commentary on the facade, it seems that generally speaking, there isn't too much in the way of comments. There was some request by the town's control architect for a little bit more articulation, and it's certainly going to be provided in the next submission. But generally speaking, I think there's very positive feedback on this facade design. This is the money shot, looking at the office pods, trying to give people an idea how this is going to look in 3D. So we can obviously come back to here. No need for me at this point to dwell on it, other than to say that, generally speaking, there's a high amount of glazing for the offices for obviously visual interest again. Now, last thing I want to touch on is the required zoning amendments. So we already talked about the fact that the intention is to rezone the site such that it's in conformance with the official plan. So of course, the whole site, any portion of the site that's environmental is going to be designated environmental protection, and any portion of the site that's designated for employment uses, i.e. it's not constrained by any natural feature, will be designated prestige employment. Further to that, there are two site-specific amendments we're looking at, and I characterize them very, very much so like that, site-specific, to deal with specific peculiarities of this site. So the first is the front yard parking, and the bylaw restricts that to 20%. Now, in this case, front yard parking is going to be in excess of that for a very simple reason. We actually have 3 public road frontages ultimately on this site. So we have Kingston Road in the north, Audley in the east, and Chambers in the south. generally speaking, you want to locate your parking in places, or a majority of your parking, in locations that aren't publicly visible, just so the building has a little bit more of a street presence. It's an urban design thing, and as well, a little bit of a walkability thing. Now, in this case, we have to locate, obviously, the parking spaces in proximity to the office pods. The office pods, in turn, provide architectural screening for the loading spaces. And the loading spaces, generally speaking, are something we want to screen from public views. So as a result of the way that the site with 3 public road frontages operates, it's very difficult to both provide loading in the rear and parking in the rear and not have people walk kilometers to get to the office pods. And so that is, in essence, the genesis behind the request to allow additional front yard parking. Now, what you see on the screen here is a section, and I think this highlights the care we've taken in relation to that proposed variance, or proposed amendment. You'll see here on the far left side of the screen, a person standing here. They're standing on Kingston Road. And on the far east side here, you're going to see the building. Now, in between the building and the person, you'll see a large row of planting. It's a 12-meter landscape strip there to provide significant parking screening. So what's going to happen there is that anybody who's looking from Kingston Road to the site will be able to see the top portion of the building, but aren't going to necessarily be able to see the parking area is located over here, because you have 12 meters of landscape strip, then you have the internal ring road, then you have another 9 meters, I believe, of landscaping right over here. Then you have parking, and that itself has further landscaping within it. So a great deal of landscaping was worked into the front portion of this plan for that reason, to balance the parking provided. The second site-specific request is to allow the trailer parking outdoors. Now, obviously, this is part and parcel of a warehouse use, so it's not something that's necessarily surprising. And likewise, we've made sure to screen those trailer parking areas from public view via storm ponds, natural heritage blocks, and simply location of office pods, which screen them from Chambers and Kingston. So I'm happy to go into further detail on any of those matters, but at this point, that's the preliminary presentation.
Great, thank you, Michael. I can see that we have a question in the Q&A function. So just in case the attendees didn't all hear me, either you can ask questions through this function, or you can raise your hand and then we will unmute you and then you'll be able to speak. So for the question that we received, says who will be the tenant and how many jobs will be created? So I think this question is probably best for Jillian to answer, so I'm going to defer that.
So at this point in time, we don't have any specific tenants in mind. It most likely will be a multi-tenant building, which is why there's 4 office pods being shown. So potentially 4 different tenants in the building. And in terms of the number of jobs that will be created, again, it's going to be tenant specific, depending upon whether it's an e-commerce site or it's more of a manufacturing site. So that will be dependent upon the tenant who the tenants, I should say, who will be, we haven't secured at this point in time.
Thanks, Jillian. So feel free to submit your questions or raise your hand and we can go from there. Councillor Dias, Councillor Bauer, I'm not sure if you guys had any questions. If you wanted to ask those, we can try our best to answer those as well.
Hi, Eric. It's Lisa here. Um, Thank you for the presentation. So, what's the timeline of this project right now?
So we've received the first submission. We commented on the first submission. So Ivanhoe and Big Larry Group, all their other consultants are working closely to submit that second submission. So I guess once we get to a point where comments have been addressed, staff will be preparing a recommendation report, which would have to go before council, ultimately for approval or refusal. And then we'd be, if it were to be approved, we'd be looking at kind of finalizing the site plan agreement, which is a lot more technical process. And yeah, and be going from there. So it's, I guess at this point, it's kind of up in the air. But next step would be receiving that second submission and working towards what we call the CAP, which is the Community Affairs and Planning Committee, and which also acts as a public meeting as well, but the recommendation report.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Eric, if I could add to that, I mean, I know on our end, obviously the intention, and it's probably goes without saying, but I might as well say it. Our intention is to get going as soon as possible and get shovels in the ground as soon as possible. So, you know, the hope was to be, I believe, Jillian, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the hope certainly was to be in the ground this spring or summer. Maybe aggressive, but we want to try and get this going as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's
Thank you,
correct.
Michael.
We're hoping for
Thank
this
you.
spring.
And I think that actually answers the next question I just saw posted. When would construction start and how long will it take? So, I mean, if all goes well with approvals, the intent would be that the applicant would want to start construction in this spring coming. In terms of how long it will take, Jillian, can you maybe expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't finalized the building yet, and it will be dependent upon tenant requirements as we secure tenants, but it's about 16 months.
So it's Joanne. You mentioned that that you had circulated to all of the region and staff, and also TRC and Cloca, and they had come back to the applicant with some things to address.
Yeah, so from the region's end, it's predominantly regional works department because that's what their transportation section's included in.
Right.
So there are quite a bit of transportation matters that will ultimately need to be addressed. It is a complicated site. You do have the construction of a new town road as well. On the environmental end, so yes, you have TRCA to the west because the Crothers Creek Valley lands are there. And then you have CLOCA, Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, to the east. And that's because there is actually a regulated wetland in the corner of, at the corner of Kingston and Audley, which actually goes on to the town-owned lands, which Audley Road ultimately needs to be extended down upon. So there is going to be, I guess you could say, some reconfiguration of the wetland ultimately in order to allow development to proceed, but also to ensure that, you know, the ecological benefits are still going to be there. And in fact, the applicant's going to be working towards actually improving the wetland. And as part of that, there is an existing headwater drainage feature, a tributary that contributes downstream. So they're going to be looking at realigning that with the whole Audley Road extension, and making sure that that tributary can cross underneath the Audley Road extension. So there's quite a bit of technical matters that still need to be addressed, but that's kind of the scope of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Eric, I might as well just continue off of that thought until another question comes, or maybe I'll jar a question loose. But in my recollection, I think was the TRCA side of things is more or less wrapped up. It's a much simpler process on that side. It's just the Crothers Creek Valley and the floodplain associated with it. So it's a very simple line to calculate and draw. So I believe they've already confirmed from the TRCA's end that they're satisfied with the proposal from a zoning perspective and they're happy for it to move forward. CLOCA, because of the complication with the fact that there's currently, you know, in essence, a drainage feature running down the town road, which obviously can't remain there because it's going to be a road, and relocating and reconfiguring that and working out the development limits. That one's a little bit up in the air, as you mentioned, but I think we're getting closer and closer to that. So, I think that the good news story there is that it's going to be able to be relocated. This most significant portions of the feature are going to be able to be kept, and we're just going to have to work out some buffer planting that works for everybody. But I think we're well on our way there as well.
So I see another question was posted. So when Michael spoke about the surrounding lands to the west, it was mentioned residential to the west. Can he expand on that? So I think that just means you're referring to, I guess, west of the valley lands. There is an existing subdivision there.
Yeah, that's what he was referring.
That's exactly what I was referring to. And it is well over 300 meters distant. So, and separated by a significant valley. But because this site is so large, it technically is also, at west of the subject site. But in terms of the proximity to the proposed use, because the western portion of the site, 40 odd hectares is environmental lands, it's over 300 meters distant to the west from the actual proposed facility. I was about to convert that to feet, but I don't think that would help. In the meantime, I'll scroll back down to the money shot so everybody can admire the the beautiful view.
Well, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to submit. These processes are a lot less awkward in person, that's for sure.
I think we're missing the coffee and the cookies and donuts.
For me, that's probably a good thing.
It's Lisa again. Could you maybe go over again where the entrances will be? I think you said there were 3 of them.
Yeah, I certainly can. Sorry, I was just jotting that down. Let's see if I can get it. This is probably a good scale to talk about the entrances.
Okay.
So the first entrance is over here at the northwestern corner of the site. So that's going to be right in, right out only. And primarily the intention is for that to be trucks accessing the site and going straight onto the ring road. So if I can scroll up, that's somewhere. This isn't maybe not as zoomed in as we would like. So that's somewhere around here, just east, just west of Alexander Crossing.
Okay.
We won't flip back to that. That wasn't the best image. Then directly across from Alexander Crossing, so on the southern leg of that intersection, we're going to be adding another access. So in essence, that'll become a four-legged intersection, where Alexander Crossing right now is a three-legged intersection.
Mhm.
So that's primarily going to be for people using the office pods up here, so employees, and that'll have full move, so you can go right, you can go left, you can go straight through, and obviously vice versa to come into the site. Kevin, stop me if I'm misspeaking.
No, that's right.
Planners talking about traffic and site access. Well, there's transportation engineers on the call.
It's just the driveway location.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to be involved.
Oh, thank you.
And then sorry, I digress.
No, go ahead.
The third access is going to be down here on about midway through the site, midway between Kingston and the future Chambers Drive extension. And so that's going to be, we're going to construct oddly down to that southern access. And then that's going to obviously allow people to come into the site and make a right in, or leave the site and make a left out. And then they'll be at Kingston and Audley intersection, which is signalized right now.
Okay. Thank you.
No
So
worries.
then maybe Kevin, you're the transportation expert. Do you have any comments about traffic or transportation regarding this site?
Nothing specific. I mean, we're as was mentioned, we've submitted the initial study, and there's comments that we're addressing. I think as Michael mentioned, the right in, right out on Kingston is going to be primarily trucks, and I think the Audley access as well is going to provide trucks access to the east side, and then it'll be primarily passenger cars at the Alexander Crossing access.
Okay.
I guess one other thing we could touch on, just for the counselor's knowledge or reference. And you can see in the northeast corner, right at the intersection there, there's that kind of bubble. So that's the outline of the buffer for the wetland. Yeah, right there. So the wetland's currently located there, and then you have an existing woodlot too, which is kind of a continuation of the natural feature itself, which extends further south. So with this proposed entrance off of Audley, there are going to be some encroachments into that woodland, and through the environmental protection policies, CLOCA, Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority sign off, there is going to have to be some compensation for that. So what happens is when a development is encroaching into a natural feature, we look for compensation elsewhere, either elsewhere on site or elsewhere on other lands to be preserved or protected, that kind of provide an ecological gain at the end of the day. If you're removing something, you're going to be putting something back somewhere else. So there is going to have to be a lot of that, just to make sure that any encroachments are justified. But the wetland itself is actually going to be improved through this development process, as right now, currently, it is an isolated wetland that isn't functioning at its best. So with the improvements that they're doing, the restoration, it is going to be functioning better, and they're going to be extending the existing stream that comes through here to make sure that it can still proceed underneath Audley Road through a culvert system and go to the east as it currently drains.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right, Eric? That's the whole trick of the of this entire environmental feature over here. It's been a challenge, to say the least, because it's not one of those scenarios where it's a cut and dry and easy solution, because there's so many moving parts. The feature itself actually comes up like this, and comes up the whole road allowance. So it's there we have to deal with and contend with kind of relocating portions of it into this area, and then dealing with the problems that are associated with the drainage, because there's actually, I think my understanding is too much water, and it needs to kind of get conveyed through here quicker
Not
than
enough water. It's not wet.
there's not enough water. See, and this is why I should have brought on our environmental consultant.
It's not much of a wetland right now. It's more of a dry land.
And then the other thing is that crossing, like you mentioned, and where that comes through on Audley, and that's kind of setting where this location is right now. But as Eric knows, we're working through with Cloca to see if there's a different, location for that crossing, and where the most appropriate location for the crossing is, so that we actually kind of achieve what we need to with getting the water through there. And then I think the only other thing, Eric, that I would add too is we had discussed with Cloca with regards to compensation. They acknowledge that there's actually a lot of land between this ring road and the floodplain here that you see kind of meandering over along here. And so the idea was that, this is immediately adjacent to a really large environmental feature. And despite the fact that this is TRCA and this side is Cloca, they would be happy to see a net gain to the ecological area more broadly than just trying to take care of their own interests. So just so the councils are aware, the idea at this point anyways is to provide some compensation somewhere in this side of the site to offset anything we have to do on this side of the site to make the feature work and get Audley Road in.
I guess another thing we can touch on just for the councilor's reference is so the Chambers extension. So it's slated in the town's development charges forecasting that Chambers Drive will be extended at some point in the future from its current terminus, which I believe is at Back Crescent. However, the intent would be that Audley Road would extend to Chambers to create an intersection, and that this will ultimately be a raised intersection, because the future intent is that Audley will be an overpass over Highway 401 and then connect south to where it currently ends at the Loblaws Warehouse Distribution Center. But these are much bigger projects that currently aren't in the town's funding or budget. So for the time being, at least, since this development proposal is going to rely on Audley, we're looking at just building a section of it, and that's kind of going to be an intern design or intern build out, and ultimately go from there when there is a need to actually extend and connect the two.
It's Lisa again. So that previous slide said 630 parking spaces. So those are not all. You had talked earlier about most of the parking at the front. Is that how many parking spaces are going at the front?
Yeah, no, they're not all located.
Yeah. Okay.
So there are parking pods down here and down here at the two other where the two other office nodes are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're spread out through the site,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
because this Chambers will future be a road, and this portion of Audley will also future be a road, right? So it
Sure.
even in that spread out location, there's still potentially, depending on, again, and then you get into the peculiarities of bylaws and what's considered your front yard and what isn't. But because I guess in this case, really, if you were going to take a strict bylaw definition of your front yard, it would actually be potentially Chambers road frontage, because it's the smallest frontage on a road. Or it could flip halfway through, right? It could start off as Kingston and later down
Right.
It's a funny thing there, but that's when we deal with the site-specific bylaws at this time to kind of provide that clarity for the future, because or else this place would be a nightmare from an interpretation perspective.
Yeah, just to expand on that, it's kind of a unique situation because this site has 2 front yards and an exterior side yard, all bounded by roads or future roads. So it makes screening parking pretty difficult. And when you factor in, it's a use that has a lot of vehicle parking, it's a warehouse
Right.
distribution center. There's only so much you can do in terms of locating parking. So through the design process, there's going to be a lot of additional screening that's going to have to be required in the landscape buffers, and that can be enhanced planting, decorative metal fences, masonry walls, that kind of thing, just to make sure that the future streetscapes and at least the Kingston streetscape are visually present. But yeah, there is going to have to be some technical exceptions through the rezoning to address the parking. And it's just because it is a unique situation with all the road frontages.
Thank you.
So we got another question. Michael spoke of landscaping along the Kingston Road frontage. Any landscaping on the south facing the 401? So yes, there will be landscaping required along the Kingston Road frontage, along the east boundaries, which would be the Audley Road frontage, as well as along the south, which would be the Chambers Road frontage, as well as what faces the 401. To be exact, I believe there was going to be a 9 to 10 meter landscape buffer at the Chambers, so along the south, which is what you would see from Highway.
Yeah,
401.
it's 9 meters on
Yeah.
Chambers.
Yeah, so you're talking about 30 feet-ish.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said
So
before, it's
pretty
going to have
significant.
planting, masonry walls, that kind of element.
And then presumably, Chambers itself will probably be, because this is a little bit of an interesting, actually, let me scroll back up to the context map here. There's actually, as you can see, a little piece here that's not part of our subject site. So that's actually owned by the MTO already. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, 100 odd meters, something like that.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, between the 401 and the property line owned by the MTO, plus another 40 meters or 30 meters, sorry, for Chambers. And then you get over to our site and that 9 meter landscape buffer.
Yeah, so it's going to be a significant distance from the highway, that's for sure.
Yeah. I misspoke. Sorry, 26 meters for Chambers. 26 meters for Chambers. I was doing the math in my head. Strike that previous comment from the record, please.
guess another thing we could touch on, just to give some people some background about the developer. Jillian, is this the first, I guess, need this type of application, warehouse distribution center development proposal that Ivanhoe Cambridge has tackled, or is there other
No,
existing?
so we have partnerships with a couple different REITs. So we own a lot of industrial with different REITs. So no, this is not our first application.
Well, I'm not seeing any new questions. I guess we'll do one last call for any questions. Feel free to raise your hand or submit it. If not, we can start wrapping up. Okay, well, thank you for all those that joined, and thank you everyone else for coming today. Oh, looks like we got one question actually. Are multiple tenants or one tenant envisioned for this building? So Jillian kind of spoke to this earlier. Do you want to touch on this again?
We're designing it for multiple tenants. That's why you see 4 office pods. So that it'll all depend on demand, but we are anticipating multiple tenants.
So I guess for those attendees, feel free to submit any emails to myself if you have any further questions. And because you did attend today, we will have record of your email address. So any further notices on this development project, we will keep you posted. So I guess that's everything. So I guess we can wrap up. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
Enjoy the
much.
Thank
rest
you.
of your evening.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody. Have a
very
good night.
much. Appreciate it.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.